And so those four, civilization itself, science and technology, progress and development, and monetary systems that are growth, that are reliant upon everlasting growth, I see those as the four main drivers of collapse and ecocide. And yet virtually all the fixes and the solutions that are being offered to us not only rely on, but rely completely on most, if not all, three or four of those. And so the poison is being offered as the cure.
Welcome to Facing Future. Today's guests are Michael Dowd, author, and as he likes to say, compost theologian, whose talks, most recently to the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, have inspired many to recognize the reality of ecological overshoot. Rupert Reed is an ecological philosopher, climate activist, and co-director of the Climate Majority Project. His most recent book is Do You Want to Know the Truth? The Surprising Rewards of Climate Honesty. And there it is. Civilizations come and go according to the capacity to live within ecological boundaries. Today's global industrial civilization is no exception, having overshot the capacity of our planet to sustain it. We are now in an inescapable predicament. How can we help people understand this reality and still live full lives at this time? What actions are actually beneficial, and what actions, however well-intended, do more harm than good? What do you think?
Well, I'll say one thing to get us started, because as in the title of my book and as in what we're trying to do with the Climate Majority Project, but I think it's something that all three of us would at some level strongly agree with. Something that we can do, which I think is profoundly valuable at this time, is to enable people to understand how bad the predicament is by being honest. Now, that might sound incredibly simple, but of course it turns out it's not that simple, because there's all sorts of barriers in the way of being honest, not least ideologies that say things like, oh, but you mustn't scare people too much. Oh, people might fall apart if you really tell them the truth. Oh, people are going to become cynical or give up. Or against all of that, we have to remain resolute and highlight the increasing evidence that actually people don't just fall apart when you tell them the truth. Okay, yeah, they often have a bit of a hard time for a while, but that's part of the process. B, the existing approach, which says, no, don't tell them, stay optimistic even when you don't feel it, and so forth, which I call toxic positivity, is palpably not working. And C, there are concrete things that we can do to break through the wall of silence, which is falling apart as we speak. It is on the verge of crumbling anyway. Among those things are working with scientists and others who are privy to bespoke information about how bad our predicament is. I mean, people like management consultants and insurers, civil servants, political leaders, especially those in government. We can encourage all of those people to disclose and try to urge them to say in public what they say in private. Things like, I'm scared about whether my children are going to have a future. Things like, collapse is now a very real possibility, indeed probability. Things like, there's absolutely no way in hell we're going to stay below 1.5 degrees of global average overheat, yet we keep pretending that we are. People need to move from saying those things to each other over pints of beer in pubs and so forth, to saying those things to the world. And that is something that quite a lot of us can do. And even if we can't do it ourselves, we can encourage others to do it. And it would really help.
Amen. Yeah, no, that's great, Rupert. It's interesting. I'm glad that you showed the title of your new book, because I've been, trying to think of mantras that inspire me on a daily basis. And one that I just that came to me, God, the universe, reality, whatever, in the last week or so, is that my aim is to live each day with the end in mind, with kindness, loving kindness and gratitude in my heart, and with the truth on my lips. And those three, with the end in mind, with loving kindness and gratitude in my heart, and with the truth on my lips, is a way that it's just a little a little, prayer to the universe, a mantra, something that allows me to sort of focus my energy. Because I'm so grateful, Dale, the way you read the topics that we would be discussing, I think is so important and is frankly so often missed in conversations among activists and climate folks and whatever, is that our main predicament is not climate change and climate mayhem, as big and as awesome and as devastating as that is already and becoming, and it's getting worse, but it's really ecological overshoot. And climate change is a subset. It's a subset of ecological overshoot. So that's our main predicament. And then, I've actually been doing a lot lately, as you saw in the Canadian Club of Rome presentation that I did in the Q&A, which was just amazing, just a couple of weeks ago. But my focus is really about, like, there's 10,000 things we can be uncertain of. And if we focus on those 10,000 uncertainties, we can get anxiety and fear and anger and blame and just the whole gamut of normal, healthy human emotions when we're dealing with that level of anxiety, and uncertainty, some of it existential. But when we can simplify things to where there's, this is just a model, but 4 things that we can say with 100% or 99% certainty are factual. And when we focus on these 4 things that are factual, it clarifies so much. It allows us to shift from confusion to clarity, like, oh, of course. And then blame gets replaced by compassion, and then love and action. Where does love motivate us to be in action? So those 4, one of them I'm mentioning, which is the climate change isn't our biggest issue. Ecological overshoot is. The second is that we're doing what all civilizations, human-centered civilizations, not ecocentric or life-centered cultures, but human-centered civilizations that basically treat our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end as merely a larder and a toilet. They always self-destruct. They always go through ecocide. They go through boom and bust, progress, regress. And so we're doing what all human-centered civilizations have done. We're not uniquely evil. We're not uniquely bad. We're not uniquely stupid. We have scores and scores of examples. So that's the second thing. The third is that most people are going to deny all that. But understanding that that's factual, that most people, call it adaptive inattention if you want, because sometimes denial gets a bad rap, but it's often just not paying attention because it's just frankly too painful and too repulsive to accept as true. So ecological overshoot's the main issue. We're doing what all human-centered civilizations have done, go through the boom and bust, progress, regress cycle, that most people will deny that. But the last one, in my opinion, is the most important, which is that even with all that, we have dozens of examples from previous collapsed civilizations and empires that it's not only possible, but it's contagious to live life fully, to love the life you live, and be as big a blessing as you can to your community, which is, of course, what gives us joy. Because just because we can't save everything doesn't mean there's not a tremendous amount of great stuff that we can do at multiple scales. So that's where I'm grateful that you opened up with really calling attention to ecological overshoot and what's not possible, but what still is possible.
One of the things is that we are consumers, and we are vastly using the Earth's resources, unaware in many cases of what we have been doing. There was a film a long time ago called Koyaanisqatsi, which for many of us was, a real wake up. This is what we're doing. Literally, look at it. And, I think that if we understand that how these industrial processes have been digging into the thing we love, which is nature, we have to wonder, was this inevitable, given human greed and human, what shall we say, ignorance of or alienation from the natural world? Was it inevitable that we would come to a point where a reset would be required on the earth in order to stop our polluting, extracting madness from continuing its wildly insane overconsumption?
We'll never really know. It's a speculative inquiry, but I think it's a speculative inquiry worth thinking about because it can give us clarity about some of the ways that it is possible and isn't possible for things to be different than they are. And that, as I say, can give us clues to how they might be in the future.
It seems to me, I think that the analogy that we are living in a time that Homo colossus has a terminal condition. Homo colossus, William Catton's term for industrial humanity, where each of us in the industrial world uses 30 to 50 times the resources and exudes 30 to 50 times the waste of Homo sapiens. So Homo colossus is absolutely destined for near-term extinction. That may or may not mean the extinction of Homo sapiens. We just don't know. But where I think a lot of people are at, and I think good people are dangerous and great people will engage in great evil if their understanding of reality is basically human-centered rather than life-centered. And the one example that I use lately is that one of the most controversial videos I've done in recent years is called the main drivers, 4 main drivers of collapse, ecocide, and likely NTHE. And the 4 drivers I see as human-centered civilizations always go through ecocide. They can't not, because they're the opposite of genuine sustainability, which is preserving the living systems that make your life and your society possible upon pain of death or ostracizing. Basically, it's all about not changing and preserving the air, the water, the soil, the forest, the life. And that's your measure of wealth. That's your measure of well-being, is life-centered measures. That's truly sustainable. Civilization itself, I see as the main driver, human-centered civilization, human-centered progress and development. The notion of progress and the notion of development interpreted in a human-centered way is inevitably ecocidal. It can't not be. The third is human-centered science and technology. I mean, science is great, but if science is only about helping us understand reality, but there's not some dimension of culture that helps us live in right relationship to the reality that we're understanding, then science and technology can cause our own extinction in terms of the pollution and just everything, you know. And then the fourth one is human-centered money systems and growth economics. And so those 4, civilization itself, science and technology, progress and development, and monetary systems that are growth, you know, that are reliant upon everlasting growth, I see those as the 4 main drivers of collapse and ecocide. And yet virtually all the fixes and the solutions that are being offered to us not only rely on, but rely completely on most, if not all, of 3 or 4 of those. And so the poison is being offered as the cure. And then, you know, the coupled with the myth of the almighty we, that there's a we that is collective, that if we just all think this way, vote this way, do this thing, that we can still transform the systems. It's holy work to do. You're doing it. Jeremy Lent's doing it. I mean, there's a lot of people, really profound voices that are about still systemic transformation, which even if it's not possible, it's holy work to do, because it's in the right direction of promoting ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. So the idea of hope is that I don't recommend hopelessness, but I don't recognize hope. I say let's move beyond hope and hopelessness, beyond optimism and pessimism, because there are some things that we can say with certain, these things are factual. And if we just ground in that, then we have a real clear mission statement for what to do. And one of them, I think, is exactly what Rupert's pointing to, was that if a lot of people continue to have hope that we can transform civilization or save whatever, then we're not going to do the few things that I think we must do to avoid being evil on a geological timescale. I mean, there's going to be massive breakdowns in society and civilization, including electrical power outages and including whacked out, you know, energies, you know, systems, and including, you know, a multi-breadbasket failure, probably not too far off. So these kinds of things that if we continue to have hope, we're likely to not do what we could do to ensure as few nuclear meltdowns as possible. That's my one hope for AI, is that it can help us do that. It can help us figure out how to ensure as little geological scale toxicity as possible. I mean, if it just does only that, it's you know, it's earned its keep, I guess. But the other thing is, in addition to the nuclear and other geological scale toxicity, but assisting other species in passing through this bottleneck. It's moving out of a human-centered perspective and saying, what can we do to increase the odds of at least some plant and tree animal species that have millions of years long lineage pass forward in a world that is most likely going to be at least 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5 degrees Celsius average, and it's going to be worse in some parts of the world. So we're looking at a mass extinction, but we can actually help tree species. We can help other species. That's my wife's work. Connie Barlow is one of the top people in North America on assisting trees in migrating. So that's holy work, even if our species days are numbered, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think that's
species are
absolutely right.
migrating, and species that lived in the south are moving north,
Yeah.
and plants that can move with birds and other things are moving with them to some extent. It'd be interesting and not to mention the migrants. We have to look at that whole section around the equator, which will be too hot. All of those people will want to migrate. Can we prepare for that? Can we, have the humanity to think, okay, this is going to happen, Canada, North America, wherever, where can we put some of the people who are going to travel? Can we preserve animal species? It looks likely that we'll lose the big mammals, the elephants, the large mammals on the earth, except for the cow, the holy cow, which is using so many of our resources. 1.6 billion cows have supplanted most of the larger mammals on the earth. We could do these kinds of things.
Yeah, and it's about coming to terms with the death, the necessary death of our own civilization in order that better things can succeed it, including hopefully better plural civilizations, and including these chances for the life chances of other non-human animals. One of the things I've been arguing in recent years is that something which we have a very high moral prerogative to do, even though it's going to be incredibly difficult to do it, is to seek to preserve those species which show evidence of culture which in some regards is superior to our own. And I mean that quite literally. So I'm talking about bonobo chimpanzees, and I'm talking about the social whales and dolphins, from which I think we should actually learn.
And elephants.
The elephants as well, absolutely, yeah. And it's these handful of species. There's something extra important about trying to preserve them and giving them a chance of getting through the bottleneck. Of course, Michael is quite right that the we required to do this kind of thing doesn't exist yet. But I also think there's something right in what you're trying to say, Dale, when you say something like, yes, but the times are calling for us to enable for it to exist. And even though that call is going to be very difficult to instantiate, the work that I'm trying to do now, the work in relation to eco-spirituality and the work in relation to the very practical work of building the Climate Majority Project, is directed towards doing that. And yes, one of the requirements for that is going to be challenging the vicious polarization that we're in, which is incredibly difficult. But I do think it is conceivable, or at least we don't know that it's not conceivable. And we should very much aim in that direction in order to minimize the chance that we lose all our capacity to do something together, which will be magnificent, possibly successful, at least in some regards, with regards to adaptation, with regard to what we can do with regard to other species, and maybe more. Maybe there is still the possibility of a full-scale transformation, which will obviate many of the more vicious possible outcomes that we all know are possible and that Michael thinks are likely. That is what is motivating the work of me and my colleagues in the Climate Majority Project. And in the end, the we is invitational, right? In the end, it's addressed to the listener or the reader. It's be part of this in as meaningful way as you can, if you're not already, and make sure that being part of is not part of a false hope, and make sure that it's not, as Michael says, part of the attempt to perpetuate something which is unperpetuatable and indeed should not be perpetuated.
Well, this civilization is it's so destructive and it's so polluting that it's hard to imagine that it would be a good thing for it to continue on and on. I mean, it would seem that we can have this happen quickly, we can have it happen slowly, but it's going to collapse of its own weight one time or another. So, where is the real work that can be done now to facilitate a softer landing, perhaps a more compassionate society coming forward, some modicum of decency to one another, to migrants, to people who are on a political divide with us. It's an ethical problem, really. It's a problem of our spirit as much as it's a problem of our technology. And that's where theology has kind of fallen by the wayside as it became more corrupt in many cases. And you consider, many churches going through various corruptions, the Inquisition, etc., and becoming wealthy. So this is why I always think of church. I love churches; they're beautiful. Cathedrals are gorgeous. But on the other hand, couldn't that money have gone to create, better lives for people all along history, instead of concentrating wealth in the hands of, frankly, religions and royalties of different kinds?
You're not wrong there. Although I would say that again, that there is something very fine about civilizations that are cultures producing great works, even at the cost of great difficulty. Of course, taking the model to the opposite extreme, which I also hugely admire, is the eco-spirituality of, for example, the Druids, who believed that it was wrong to worship anywhere but in nature, and that it was wrong to render sacred anything that wasn't already sacred by virtue of being natural. And something so splendid in that kind of notion of finding sacredness above all in the natural, and of not wanting more than that. When I see people being tourists, for example, in palaces and city centers and so on, I sometimes think, why don't you sometimes stop and think, maybe it'd be better to just go to places where people didn't build stuff like that deliberately. And by the way, there's some really brilliant stuff about this that viewers may be interested in David Graeber's final book, The Dawn of Everything. He's got some absolutely fantastic stuff in there about the values of civilizations that have valued things very different from, well, hierarchy and constructing large objects and so forth. So I guess, confident as I am that we are in a time where there will be a burgeoning of more and less organized eco-spiritualities. One part of my positive feeling towards the future, when I have such positive feeling, is vested in that confidence and in what that can bring in terms of being a seed of a massive civilizational transformation that I think is, well, that I know is bound to come. The only question is, will it be fast enough? Will it be deep enough? How widespread will it be? How much of the transformation that we're going to see is going to be instead by way of collapse, or indeed by way of kind of vicious counter-reaction, etc. Our civilization is very fixated on the scientific image, and science is splendid for doing what it can do, but it can't do everything, and we need to know its limits, and it needs to know its limits. And we've become too obsessed with knowledge, or even information, which is a more debased concept, and we're not interested enough anymore in wisdom, which of course is what philosophy is about, but it's also what is at the center of virtually every indigenous culture, the search for wisdom and the endeavor to grow and to pass on wisdom. That's another big change that we have to make, and that in some sense we will make, because in terms of what's coming, either that wisdom will grow and ensure that the transformations that are going to occur in the coming years, while being in many ways certainly extremely painful and difficult, could be on balance net positive, or if things go very badly, then there will be remnants of people who hold on to and develop and return to those wisdoms. And in times to come, they will come to seem much more central to the cultures that come after this one than they tend to do right now.
Yeah, amen. Or aho matakuyasin. The one last thing I want to communicate before I conclude, which is there's one place where I think I may have somewhat of a different perspective than the both of you or each of you, and that is related to what is already evidentially out of our control and in runaway unstoppable mode. Certain thresholds that we're not at risk of passing them. We don't have to be careful if we ran over that dog 20 years ago. These are tipping points and thresholds that are already in the rearview mirror that now are in an unstoppable mode. So that, for example, if every human being woke up tomorrow morning as an eco saint, or if every human being died in our sleep tonight, cutting emissions tomorrow to zero, these things would continue to run out of control. One of them is the burning of the world's forest, the great conflagration of the world's forest. I mean, if every human being died tonight in our sleep, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide would continue to rise for the next 40 to 100 years based on what's already in unstoppable, out of control mode. And because we have a terminal condition, and I'm not interested in a lot of the conversations that assume that we may have decades left and whatever. I mean, sure, it's a possibility, but it's not more than a 10 or 20% chance. So how do we live with that sense of mortality individually and collectively, and then spend the rest of our time and energy engaging in great work and soulful, compassionate, generous contributions to our communities in every way that we can?
Yeah, you're right that your estimate of those possibilities and probabilities differs from my own, Michael. I'm much less certain of how the future is going to pan out. One area in relation to what you just said where I do definitely agree with you is that the world's forests are now chronically at risk, and we must expect a growth of wildfires, etc., for a long time to come. One very important concrete implication of that is that schemes to reforest the earth are generally not very credible, or at the very least, they would need to be radically revised in order to become credible. And this has extremely concrete outcomes in terms of fake solutions like offsetting, for example. So Microsoft says, oh, you can go zero carbon when you purchase Microsoft because we're planting these forests. And guess what? 2 years ago, most of their forests burned down in the big Californian wildfires. And that kind of thing is going to happen more and more often. One partial way around this is that something we should do, rather than putting quite as much energy and money and so on as we are doing right now behind reforestation schemes, is to look a lot harder at stuff to do with wetlands and coastal areas and undersea stuff. So to put it extremely bluntly, if you manage to successfully seed a forest of giant kelp, there's no way that's going to burn down. Right. So anyone who's interested in this whole kind of ecosystem restoration thing, I would say we need to have a shift of our attention to putting a lot more into stuff which is water-based, because it's going to be a lot more secure in relation to the terrible, terrible fires that are coming.
Yeah. I hope that's true. The ocean is heating, of course, fantastically.
Yeah, it's still not going to burn down, though.
Yeah,
it's
that's
going
true.
to burn down, but it is acidifying and it is heating. So
yeah. You're right.
Deoxygenating.
Terrible trouble.
Deoxygenating.
Yeah.
Well,
very,
we none of
have
us
a whole
want
other conversation about the ocean, which is in terrible trouble, and
exactly.
it's often what keeps me up at night now. But at least it's not going to burn down. Small mercy.
Well, people may not realize ocean pastures and kelp sequester huge amounts of carbon, and the ocean is the major carbon sink.
They grow so fast.
Yeah. So yes, there's. So, we none of us want the terrible things that we think may happen to come to pass. And we don't enjoy telling people that these things are going to happen. And we would love it to not be true, but there it is. And we have to face it and squarely understand where we are at this time in history and come to our own work. Each person, what do I do in this time period? What is my work? Who am I and what am I doing? And who can I ally with in order to further what I think needs to be done on the earth?
Yeah.
So thank you both for this wonderful conversation. It's been great to be with you.